What do you think they'll do if they do win this time? Like the last time they rioted and destroyed their city.
If they lose, they'll do it too.
I mean, I feel like they have to have a bigger riot than the last time they won, right?
That would be funny. Just increase it. Every time the amount championships you win, the worse it gets.
Yeah, just burn all of Philadelphia to the ground.
It'd be just like the American Revolution all over again. David Berman is a name that carries an immeasurable weight in the indie music scene. David's attention to detail when it came to crafting his songs, poems, and cartoons could be considered an obsessive exercise in self-imposed perfectionism, as legend tells us that he would spend months working on a single line for a song. However, it was this dedication to his craft that turned him into one of the most renowned and well-respected artists of his generation. A recluse by nature, he eventually decided to step away from the limelight, only to return after tragedy struck, and his only emotional outlet was strumming the same chord on his guitar over and over again until a new project, Purple Mountains, was born. In this episode, we'll examine the life of a man who left everything on the table to be poked and prodded by the audience, which ultimately culminated in the release of Purple Mountains' self-titled album and a devastating aftermath. So for all the things that make you feel sad, bad, or generally just not rad, this is Existential Shred.
He did cartoons also?
He did cartoons, he was a poet, which... For anyone who's interested, the episode description is actually one of his poems from the book Actual Air, which I have a copy of. I read the whole thing. It's really good. And in the episode description is the poem New York, New York, which was my favorite in that book. Before we get started proper, quick content warning. This is an episode that will touch on a lot of topics surrounding addiction, mental illness, self-harm, and death. So if you do not want to listen to this, there are no hard feelings. We will see you next time. So, Purple Mountains, and more, I would say, more focused in on David Berman.
He was the only member of the band, right?
Not technically.
Okay.
It was his project, but he worked with members of the band Woods. I think they did like the drummer and some instrumentation, but they were like producing the band as well. Before we jump into the album, I just want to give some context to the story because there's a lot going on to really take in the full impact of what we're about to talk about. And I want to say I'm definitely not doing David Berman's story any justice. This is kind of an abridged attempt just to keep this episode at a decent length. So who is David Berman? David Berman was born in 1967 in Williamsburg, Virginia. As I said in the intro, he was a poet, a singer, a cartoonist, and obviously a songwriter. He was the son to Richard Berman, who was a lawyer, a public relations executive, and a lobbyist, which is very important to the story. He is known for lobbying against unions, lobbying for the American Beverage Institute, as well as tobacco, firearms, things like that. One of his big things was opposing the lowering of blood alcohol arrest thresholds. So he was like trying to sell alcohol or lobby for alcohol. And in Utah, they tried to take the threshold from 0.08 to 0.05. So his dad, as a lobbyist, came up with this slogan, Utah, come for vacation, leave on probation.
Nice.
They did not have a great relationship. He was forced to live with his father after his parents got divorced because his dad was concerned that David would grow up to be a wimp. So, yeah, you kind of get this, you immediately kind of start to see some friction there, and that's going to be a really important through line throughout his life. At age of 15, David was diagnosed with depression, which he would later report was resistant to treatment. He says that a lot, that his depression became resistant to treatment. Because of this, he began to self-medicate with recreational drugs. Even I've found an interview where he talks about how during his second year of college, he was smoking PCP every single day.
Holy shit.
Yeah, and, you know, that's just one facet of his drug use.
Yeah.
While he was away at the University of Virginia, he would meet his future Silver Jews band members, which, if you don't know who Silver Jews are, they are described as alt country or slacker rock or indie rock, depending on, you know, how pretentious who you're talking to is.
I call them all the above.
Yeah. Do you know anything about Silver Jews?
I listened to them. I know that they were Well, I think their first album came out like 1989, so they've been around for quite some time. I listened to some of their songs here and there. Like when I say listen to, I mean, I have heard they have been recommended and like ended up on a couple playlists, but I didn't listen to them like, extensively. I like everything I've heard, and I do even more so nowadays like those genres of like alt rock, slacker rock, indie rock. Like, I mean, a lot of even this album, I feel like it was kind of a I feel like Silver Jews and Purple Mountains could have been a big influence on Slaughter Beach Dog
Yeah.
in general, and I could see this going that both those bands ended up going in like a playlist of mine for stuff like that.
Yeah. I'm not the biggest Silver Jews fan. Some of their stuff is just a little too, I don't know. It is slacker rock, so
Yeah.
it's kind of like laid back. But the more like Smith and Jones Forever and Random Rules are two of my like just favorite songs ever. But Silver Jews consisted mainly of three members: David, Stephen Malkmus, and Bob Nastanovich, which
I was gonna say I've heard Malcolmus's name before, and I'm trying to remember what from.
so Stephen and Bob are both from the band Pavement.
Okay, I didn't listen to them really, so.
Later in the band's time, David's wife Cassie Berman would also join as well. Overall, Silver Jews released 6 albums, 3 EPs, with albums such as Lookout Mountain, Lookout Sea, The Natural Bridge, and American Waters, which if you're familiar with Silver Jews, will be the album that you know. It has a very distinct,
Cover.
yeah. blue, pink cover, which upon its release got a 9.9 on Pitchfork. So it basically got a perfect rating from Pitchfork. So some of the like background for, again, how David's depression and drug use really influenced his life and influenced his art and how he worked with art. During the making of Natural Bridge, one of their first albums, he was hospitalized for appearing to be quote unquote haunted by ghosts and hospitalized for sleep deprivation.
I love that they used to be able to hospitalize you. They're like, this kid's haunted.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not like he was put in a straitjacket and thrown in a padded room, but
Yeah, I know.
he was hallucinating from sleep deprivation. He also chose not to perform live because he was afraid of performing, and he said that it felt like some unnecessary post-invention marketing effort. So even though his mind is not all there, like obviously there's a lot going on mental health wise, drug wise, he is very cerebral in that sense.
You could tell just in general his writing.
Well, that's the thing, is that what I said in the intro, he is very well known. He would isolate himself and he would spend months writing lyrics, and even just single lines. He would spend months writing single lines.
That's crazy. Like yeah.
In 2003, he did attempt to take his life. It was reported, he went to a crack house in his wedding tux and attempted to overdose on crack cocaine, alcohol, and tranquilizers. Thankfully, it was not successful, and he eventually would go to rehab in 2005. And then 4 years later, in January 2009, David announced that he was going to be retiring from music, which the final Silver Jews show was actually in Cumberland Caverns in Tennessee, which is a cave located 300 feet underground.
That's awesome.
Which, yeah, I just thought that was pretty cool. There's video on YouTube. You can watch their final show. I've watched the footage. I never realized it was in a cave. But yeah, they closed their last show by saying, David said, "I always said we would stop before we got bad." When we look at why he left music, there was a lot of thoughts surrounding commercialization of modern music, especially in relation to his father as a lobbyist. And this was when David first announced that his dad was the famous lobbyist Richard Berman. And some background, again, they had a very tumultuous relationship. David owed him money, and at one point had even donated money himself to a watchdog group called Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, which was investigating Richard Berman, his father. So very lot of friction there. And then he basically ended Silver Jews and his music career at that point by saying he got into music thinking that he could undo some of the evil that people like his father were doing, but everything he's accomplished didn't amount to a millionth of what evil has been done. So he was just like, it's kind of pointless. And that's when he really became a recluse and began making his cartoons. And then all of a sudden he comes back as Purple Mountains. So what happened? In 2016, his mother died. And like I said in the intro, he said the only therapeutic thing that comforted him at this point was he picked up his guitar and he would just strum the exact same chord over and over and over again. And he eventually wrote the song I Loved Being My Mother's Son, which is on Purple Mountains. After that, 2 years later, his wife Cassie divorced him, and he was under the impression that his chronic depression made him unfit to be anybody's husband. During this time, he also fell away from religion. Silver Jews aren't just a weird name. He was of the Jewish faith. So he fell away from that. That was a big turning point in his life. He also fell upon very significant financial difficulties, and he owed over $100,000 in credit card debt from when he was using drugs. So with the encouragement of Drag City's president, Dan Koretsky, Purple Mountains became like a proper project. So I know that was kind of long-winded, but there's a lot that you can get in that context.
I didn't realize that you could just buy drugs with a credit card back then.
Well, times have changed.
Yeah,
you can pull money off of a credit card.
It's just a funny thing to think. It's like racked up all this credit card debt buying drugs. It's
Yeah.
like, man, you had some pretty bougie drug dealers.
Yeah, everyone had Square readers.
Yeah.
So all of that is the context for what Purple Mountains is. There's a lot going on, and you really get a big feel for all of this in the first song, That's Just the Way I Feel, which is basically just the thesis statement for the album, as well as a way for David to tell the audience everything that's happened since he stepped away from music. And I think one of the first things that people will really notice is this song and a lot of songs on the album are so upbeat, but what he is saying is not.
No, it's a big juxtaposition. Just the whole album is entirely.
Yeah, and I found a quote. He said, somebody asked him like, why do you kind of gravitate towards this style? And he just said, it complexifies the profile of it to have the music and the words at odds. So that's why so much of the album is very upbeat country music with like some of just the hardest things to hear a human say out loud, let alone on a recorded track.
Track 2, it really like shines out in that, but
yeah,
even just the title of that track is All My Happiness Is Gone, and it's just like, it's not a somber song.
No.
Unless you read the lyrics.
Yeah, and like there are 4 main themes that I kind of pull out from the album as a whole, and I think you can map on pretty easily to all of the songs to some degree. Hopelessness, estrangement, apostasy, and death.
I don't know that I know what apostasy means.
Because I used Google Thesaurus. Apostasy is just the act of falling away from religion.
Okay.
First track, That's Just the Way That I Feel, is just, it's hopelessness to a degree. It's him telling the audience, I'm in a really bad place. Like, one of the first lyrics in the first verse is, I spent a decade playing chicken with oblivion. And I found an interview where they ask him, like, you're writing very bluntly. Is this meant to be taken literally? And he said, yeah, it's absolutely literal. Like, you're supposed to take it as literally as you can. And it just continues to kind of build, talking about he's growing more distant from people around him, and he's like, a lot of the stuff that, and this is kind of why I felt the context was so important. Like, the entire verse 2 is him talking about, like, I've been humbled by the void, my faith has been destroyed, my foes are enjoying all this feast of Schadenfreude. So it's just really catching everybody up.
Schadenfreude is like dissociation, right? Isn't that?
Schadenfreude is, it's the German word for like taking joy out of others' misery.
Okay.
So like, the worse that he does, the more people around him seem to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And then the chorus has like a gleam of hope in it, where he says a setback can be a setup for a comeback if you don't let up. But then immediately says, but this kind of hurting won't heal. In the end of all wanting is all I've been wanting. And that's just the way that I feel. So it sets up the actual title of the song as well. But again, just very like upbeat country song. Really just a weird juxtaposition that if you're not listening in, you're not going to catch like how hopeless this song really is.
You really have to be paying attention to pick up on it, which I think, like, for people that don't like the content that we cover, some people could definitely be, I don't want to say like tricked into being like, oh yeah, and then they're like, oh, wait a second. But
yeah, I mean, the one of the last verses, which sounds the happiest, he says, I met failure in Australia. I fell ill in Illinois. I nearly lost my genitalia to an anthill in Des Moines. It's like, if you're just kind of picking up on things here and there, you're going to hear that. You're going to be like, all right, that's pretty funny. And you're going to miss the part where, yeah, he's talking about never coming back from his pain and his misery. And then you move on to, as you mentioned, All My Happiness Is Gone. Really kind of going into the estrangement and hopelessness, the factors that cause him to be different than others and estranged from others. I mean, he starts off by opening the song just saying, friends are warmer than gold when you're old, and keeping them is harder than you might suppose. Lately, I tend to make strangers wherever I go. Some of them were once people I was happy to know. So you're just really getting the sense that, and he was, I think, 50, he was above 50, north of 50 when he was writing this. So, I mean, they say it's harder as you get older to keep make friends and keep friends.
As you get, even as like, I'm in my 30s, it's just like, if you feel busy and hard to stay close to people sometimes that you were in the past. I also didn't know, listening to this, that him and his wife got divorced, and it also makes some of the, like, a lot more of the lyrics make sense there too. Like, even in the previous song when he says he sees her in the park, and
when I see her in the park, it barely merits a remark.
Yeah.
How we spend the standard distance that strangers stand apart, which the idea of the turns of phrase that he uses with stranger throughout the album are really like perfect.
Yeah.
Using stranger in that context, like I said, for the opening verse of this, he says, lately I tend to make strangers wherever I go. And then there's a song later in the track list, she's making friends, I'm turning stranger. And again, it's kind of a theme, estrangement, but the way he uses that word to mean so many different things it's perfect. But yeah, I mean, this is just a very straightforward, all my happiness is gone. Again, it's this really like upbeat, driven by acoustic guitar, and then there's some like pad synth going on in the background to really build up the atmosphere.
The chorus is, it's such a catchy chorus too, even though it's literally just like almost the same line 3 times in a row, but just the way it's sung and just everything. It's, again, if like you're not paying attention, it's like, oh, this sounds good. It's like, oh, it's really sad though.
Yeah, it's profoundly sad. I mean, the opening to the third verse, he says, 10,000 afternoons ago, all my happiness just overflowed. That was life at first and goal to go, which, for anyone who doesn't watch football, first and goal means you're in the 20 yards of the end zone, so you could feasibly, you're in a good position to score, which, in the context of like this metaphor, is probably saying he was as close to actually reaching happiness as he could, or really like having something more meaningful in his life. And then obviously the kind of him looking back on it and speaking of it in a nostalgic retrospective way means he didn't get there. Really powerful song about, we get the thesis statement. This is, hey, this is what I've been up to. And then it's like, well, this is where I'm at now. And all my happiness is gone. And that takes us to Darkness and Cold. 3 of the most upbeat songs you could get back to back to back. So since you were mentioning that you didn't realize that he had gotten divorced during, I guess, before the album, I'm assuming like it kind of clicks with the song, this one now, because it's very specifically about him and his wife.
I didn't read as much into like the Wikipedia about himself for this one. My preparation was mostly listening to it and looking at lyrics, and not really digging into them more. But
I have almost 10 pages of notes. You don't have to do research for this one.
I figured this one. You said this one was pretty important to you, so
yeah. This album is very significant. This is one of the ones I think everybody needs to listen to.
I do agree with that.
Yeah, it's an album like A Crow Looked at Me by Mount Erie's difficult.
Yeah.
Every single time you listen to it. This is very in a similar vein. However, this is much more accessible.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's an easier listen, even though the content is sad.
Yeah. So Darkness and Cold opens up the entire song. He talks about, he wrote it because he knew he was going to have to deal with one day that his wife would eventually be with someone else. And he said he wrote this song as a way to deal with that before it actually happened. So he's painting this picture of someone whose, significant other is no longer in the picture, and he's seeing them kind of thrive without him in his life. So he opens it up. The light of my life is going out tonight as the sun sinks in the west. And you get this side, you keep getting this reoccurring motif of the light of my life is going out, where he says, as the sun sinks in the west with someone she just met, and she don't look too depressed, in a pink champagne Corvette, and then finally without a flicker of regret. So it's building this idea that while he is going through all these emotions, he sees her kind of thriving and having to deal with that. And it's very difficult to kind of, reconcile with. This is the one that doesn't sound as cheery.
Yeah.
I mean, the chorus kind of does. And again, it's the repeating, darkness and cold, darkness and cold. But it is more aligned with like a kind of country tear in your beer kind of song.
The song, I don't know, I definitely thought it was about, a lost love, but didn't realize how close it was to him at that time. So
again, kind of like why I really wanted to build the context of this album, because there's a lot. The next song is one of the ones that I think it feels like it doesn't fit. And it's Snow is Falling in Manhattan. And I'm not going to lie, it only kind of made sense why it's on this album after I started reading everything for this. Because it's very somber, very slow, and it's just about, painting a picture of, a neighborhood in Manhattan where the snow is starting to fall, and talking about like a caretaker pulling in like a cat, salting the stoop. And honestly, it was a song that like, when it starts to snow, like if I'm driving the car, I put it on because it feels very like comfortable.
this is the one that made me like Christmas music. I'm just-
That would be a hell of a story.
yeah.
Um,
A throwback to our
especially
holiday
because
episode.
one of the first lyrics is snow is falling in Manhattan in a slow diagonal fashion on the Sabbath,
Yeah, that's
kind of reinforcing it's not a Christmas song. But yeah, I didn't realize this, but there is a narrative to this song, which I don't know. Again, I felt like it was the weird one, and he talked about how he started writing the song as just like a story where he was watching some guy like sweep up the snow, and then it became a metaphor for the singer and the listener, and how by the end of the song you realize that the listener is the person in the song, and that the host is, it's kind of hard to explain. But in the song itself, it talks about there's a ghost, the ghosts that we leave behind in the houses, and you come to realize like he's basically saying, yeah, the listener is the person who's invited into the house, and this song is the ghost that the host is leaving behind for the person to like listen to. So it's like a it's from a meta perspective almost. I don't have too much on to say about this one. Like I said, it's kind of the one-off, or it feels like the odd one out, but it sets up my favorite song on the album.
It's my favorite song on the album also.
It's really hard. It's really hard for it to not be. It's so big and like blunt.
Yeah.
Which the album is a very big and blunt album. But track 5 is Margaritas at the Mall. This is where the apostasy of the album, this is just him kind of contending with religion and the idea of God.
I love I think it's the bridge right before the chorus there. He is saying like that.
How long can a world go on under such a subtle God?
Yeah.
How long can the world go on with no new word from God? And it's just
it's that final part. It's like, see the plot of the hope.
See the plot of the flawed individual
yeah.
looking for a nod from God.
It's just I think the rhyming also with the poetry, like.
Yeah, which I didn't know what plod. I always thought he was saying blood.
I thought he was saying plot at first.
Yeah, plod is like a heavy-handed walk or a heavy stepped walk.
Okay.
So like, a child
like plodding around.
Yeah. Again, this kind of contending with the idea of falling away from religion. I mean, even the idea of what meaning do you make without this in your life, where in the last verse or the last line of the first verse, he says, the whole first verse, he says, my everyday begins with reminders I've been stranded on this planet where I've landed beneath this gray as granite sky, a place I wake up blushing like I'm ashamed to be alive. And then the chorus is just this like horn kind of, I want to say like Latin flavored, where it's, which might just be because the title's Margaritas at the Mall, but it is very like horns, acoustic guitar, and he's talking about like we're all just drinking margaritas at the mall. That's what this adds up to, with the idea being like, he said that it's the idea that the world of commerce is like a purgatory. So like you're just drinking margaritas at the mall is a kind of a representation of a purgatory.
Just waiting it out.
Yeah, basically.
I think that also I don't want to say symbology, but just like the reference, like this happy hour has got us by the balls. This is purgatory. We're all here because there's a benefit to being here now, right? It's kind of like to me, like not like benefit necessarily, but if you think about happy hour, right? It's like people want to be here for a reason. People are drawn to it.
Yeah, you get half off.
Yeah,
you get half off your what was it called when you could buy your way into heaven? An indulgence. Yeah, you get happy hour, half off your indulgence to heaven.
And your indulgence of booze.
That is true. Yeah.
They may be appetizers.
Yeah, while you're waiting in purgatory, you can get half off mozzarella sticks and fried pickles.
Oh man, fried pickles sound good.
But yeah, this is definitely my favorite song on the album. I think it's just such a catchy tune while also being very poetic and to the point and kind of very representative of just a look into the mind of a man who's fallen out of religion in real time. It's just very like harrowing in that regard. After that, we jump into the song She's Making Friends, I'm Turning Stranger, which again is playing on that estrangement, using the word stranger, where he references, lately I tend to make strangers wherever I go, back and happiness is, all my happiness is gone.
The middle of this album is so good. There's Margaritas at the Mall going into this. This is easily my second favorite song on the album, and it's like you get the first two again that are kind of like upbeat, and then one that's not as upbeat. Snow in Manhattan is a very like slower, like then you just get these two like back to back that are just amazing.
Yeah, it seems very, what's the word?
Purposeful.
Purposeful, thank you. It seems very purposeful for it to start off with these three very heavy songs, a very like light, airy snow is falling in Manhattan, into what would seem to be the heaviest topic in Margaritas at the Mall, and then a more lighthearted She's Making Friends. It seems very purposeful to kind of give the audience like a break as they go through the album, or like some respite. Yeah, this is one, the opening lines, I don't know why, but I just like, I say this, I've said this multiple times, but like, I just find myself saying it to myself, because he says, I want to be tantamount to cordial, tantamount to good. I want to be a warm and friendly person, but I don't know how to do it. And I just think it's the way he says it's so funny. Yeah. I don't know. Like, obviously he's being very blunt and honest and like open about how he feels, but it's just so funny the way he says it. Again, with the idea of him and his wife getting divorced at this point, he wrote this song. They were still friendly. So like, even though they weren't together, they were still friendly. He even said that they had a joint bank account after they got divorced. They still owned a house together. So like, there was no animosity between them. And the idea of this song is like, he's getting to see her thrive. And again, we kind of get that with Darkness and Cold, but like, she's out and about, you know, she can't make it to the part, or she can't make it to her car without making a new friend. And then he's turning stranger. So just kind of like going through this, he said it's very true to life, but the ending to the song is happier than the interactions him and his ex-wife would have.
I can imagine that being a hard situation in general, like breakups and divorce, you know, aside, but to continue to live with the person, like I understand everything being like there's no animosity, but having to see somebody else like thrive every day.
Yeah, especially if you're dealing with the kind of things that he's dealing with, and like it being exacerbated by drug use, like recreational drug, not like, again, he was saying it was his depression was treatment resistant, but treating it with recreational drugs is not going to help in the way that you think it's going to help.
No, it never does.
No. Again, kind of the sequencing of the album being purposeful. You get a song about him and his wife growing apart, followed up by the song that kicked off Purple Mountains altogether, I Loved Being My Mother's Son, which on title alone, he's talking in the past tense. I loved being my mother's son. It's obvious what he's talking about. And it's just it can be, for anyone who's like lost a parent, like this is probably a very genuinely difficult song to listen to, because it's him talking about how much he loved his mother and how he doesn't get to be her son anymore. And it is like heartbreaking.
It's very heartbreaking.
And this is the song that kicked off all of Purple Mountains. This was his therapeutic way of getting back into music.
I imagine it started like he wrote this song, was like, that kind of felt good. And then he started writing songs about other things he was dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah. This is kind of the most, I don't want to say uninterpretable song, but it's just the most like, I'm just going to say I loved being my mother's son. Like, it's just a song about her, how much she meant to him. It is sad, don't get me wrong, but it's not sad in the sense that he's, talking about any of the any of the stuff that he's talked about
Yeah.
up to this point, which, again, we're talking about the purposefulness of this sequencing. You probably get the heaviest song right after that, which is Nights That Won't Happen. I think this is the toughest song to listen to on the album, just from a thematic standpoint. It starts off extremely just like a punch to the face. And he says, the dead know what they're doing when they leave this world behind. Again, this is an album full of very heavy topics. This is a tough one. What did you get from this?
I feel, to me, this is definitely in my brain just from like the idea of the lyrics in the song. He may have lost some friends to suicide, and it's kind of like, I mean, that's a very close subject for me. And it, at the start, being like very angry about it, and like with that lyric, just in his thought, the dead know what they were doing when they leave this world behind. It's like, yeah, you kind of get angry at first. I don't know, in the realms of the song, that he ever, like, it gets past that anger portion for him. It seems like, which is an easy thing to kind of stay in, is being angry about it, before you start realizing how to kind of like still celebrate their life
Yeah,
afterwards.
yeah, and again, it's coming off the back of a song about his mom dying.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure if that's how she'd passed.
No,
Okay.
no, she, I think, as far as I can tell, natural causes. There's not a lot of, unlike his dad, there's not a lot
Yeah.
about his mom on researchable. But obviously, even just of natural passing, he's talking about the dead know what they're doing when they leave this world behind. When the dying's finally done and the suffering subsides, all the suffering gets done by the ones we leave behind. So it's this idea, even if it's a natural death, their suffering is over, but it just kind of begins for everyone who's still here. And then I found an interview where someone asked him about this song specifically, and he talks about he had a friend, Patsy, who he was living with, and she had a mental breakdown and swallowed Drano.
Oh shit.
She did survive that incident, but later she died around the time that he was making the album. And he said this song is kind of an expression of the guilt of being around her when she was like in the midst of chaos, but not when she would have needed him the most. And he did, I read in the interview as well, he's talking about like he's had a lot of friends who have passed. So it is very, I guess in a way, it's probably similar to like a survivor's guilt, where
Yeah.
he's kind of reflecting on his own life and being like, all these people I've loved are gone, and I'm the one who is still here. Yeah, it's a really tough song. This is, I think, the one when I go through the album, I have the hardest time listening to.
Yeah. It's a very hard song, just thematically. I have trouble skipping any song on this album. I think I listened to it probably 4 or 5 times since we decided to cover it, and I was listening to it again on the way up here. I like the things that make me sad, so I just kind of,
Yeah,
I kind of thrive in it. But
that's why this whole
Yeah.
show exists. After this, you get the song Storyline Fever,
a lot more upbeat.
way more upbeat. It's kind of a healing song, which is where my idea of like hopelessness, estrangement, apostasy, and death kind of doesn't fit perfectly, but whatever. I'm not a professional. It's more about like anxiety and depression, and this idea of like, once you have this narrative of like how things should go or how things should be, or like who you are in relation to everyone else, it kind of just grabs a hold of you, and then you run with it, you make a storyline out of it. And he even said that this was like his way of discussing, or like this was his cognitive behavioral therapy, where like you kind of talk through the issue itself. So this was his way of like doing a CBT exercise. Yeah, very upbeat, very country ballad-esque.
It's very big.
And it's like it's just kind of like a slice of life. Like
Hmm.
he's just talking like it's almost like you can jump from like character to character with these kind of setups that he's
Yeah.
giving, and just get like a look into their life real quick about how storyline fever has got its hooks in them. And then one of the lyrics to kind of drive home the idea of like anxiety, depression, he says, "You got to find a way to make it work because defeat is where your demons lurk." So again, if we're going along with the idea of the anxiety, depression, and like being able to like once you kind of think something, it kind of takes a hold of you, where it's like, oh, I gotta succeed, or when you have that defeat, that's where all these things really come out. Last but not least is the song "Maybe I'm the Only One for Me."
Which is a very fucking sad song.
It is, but it is again. The track listing I think is very purposeful in this. It ends on probably the saddest notion or the saddest self-realization you can have for someone. But again, it's just this really upbeat country bop.
Yeah, and the thing that's like very sad to me, and it's in the third verse when he says, "If no one's fond of fucking me, maybe no one's fucking fond of me," and it's like, it's just like oh man, like I feel bad for the guy so
Yeah.
much because. And it's going into what, like, even the song before this too, and he's talking about motivational paralysis. Like, I can imagine that all these things happened. He's he doesn't seem like he has a lot of motivation to do anything else. He wrote this as an outlet for what he was going through, and it only because of that he needed something like that. This album even exists. So it's like there's not really the motivation to. I didn't think to make a new band. It was just he made this. He was in bands before and knows how to produce stuff and get stuff out there, and he did.
Yeah, which even like it kind of speaks to like one of the lines is I'll put my dreams high on a shelf. I'll have to learn to like myself. So it's this idea that like in the midst of all of this kind of success and like doing all of these things, is he reaching for the thing that will make his life meaningful and enriched and all of these things. Funny story, again, I found an interview. He said this song is an incel anthem.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess the line that I highlighted is
Yeah,
yeah. It's a
but
very incel like line.
which he said that it's not a message he's proud to speak. The idea of it being an incel anthem is like he's taking all of these very miserable, dark thoughts and like attempting to put them to some good, but like it's just ultimately self-destructive. And he said that this is not a love song to self. The idea that maybe I'm the only one for me is not an empowering
No,
message.
that's not what I got out of
Yeah,
it
yeah,
whatsoever. Right?
yeah. It is very. It's forlorn. It's estranged. It is hopeless. It's sad. It's just sad.
And I will throw this out there too. Like, I I didn't take it as the incel anthem because he doesn't. He's not the
It's not like bitter.
incels are bad whenever it's like bitter and they like, well, women just suck, blah blah blah. Like whenever they lash out to other and not seeing what the problem is inward, like that's when you get dubbed incels, when you're lashing out against others because you're involuntarily celibate.
Yeah, you're not reflecting on the situation.
Yeah, and that's not David Berman.
No.
He only reflects on the situation.
Yeah.
Everything he looks at is a mirror. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a great way to put it. So, album comes out, and it is met to immediate success. 87 on Metacritic, 8.5 Pitchfork, 85 album of the year, number 37 on Rolling Stone's top 50 albums of that year, and it was number 153 on Pitchfork's top 200 albums of the decade. So huge success. They were gearing up for touring, which was a big step for David. He didn't like to tour with Silver Jews, so this was him taking that step out. And he even said like he's really excited because he was coming out of like isolation. And album released July 12th, 2019, and on August 7th, 2019, a little under a month later, David took his own life. And that's where all of the context of the album becomes that much more significant.
Absolutely.
In the same capacity where someone like David Bowie wrote the album Black Star knowing he was dying, it's not ridiculous to see this album as David understanding what was going to happen after it was released. I think it's, at times, it is unreal to hear him talk about exactly what he is talking about.
It's surreal. It's very surreal. I think the first time you sent me this album, you told me that after I was like, I really enjoyed that album. You're like, yeah, a month after the release, he killed himself. And I was like, oh my God. Like,
Yeah.
holy shit. And like, it's such a shame because he's such a talent. I mean, not just to say like he had things to give and we're never going to, get those again. But he was such a talented artist. Like all around, like poet, like you said. I haven't read his stuff. I want to now. It's just, it's such a good artist that's just no longer with us, and that's sad.
I very deliberately picked specific lines to talk about throughout the album because when I was introduced to this album, it was through all the critical acclaim. I tried to listen to it, and at that point, I was a little closed off to like country adjacent things. Mm-hmm. And I was like, it's not really for me. And then I heard what had happened, and I revisited it, and it just immediately changed my mind because you start to see all these double meanings in the lyrics. And again, I was very, very specific about my choice of lyrics that I said throughout the album because of this. Mm-hmm. I think the big one that really, I think, illustrates this the best is In Darkness and Cold. Obviously, it is about his wife leaving him and finding somebody else, but let's look at the line, "The light of my life is going out tonight."
Yeah.
The light of my life is his wife. Also, from a metaphorical standpoint, his life.
Yeah.
And we know that the light of his life in the song is going out tonight as the sun sinks in the west with someone she just met. She doesn't look too depressed, in a pink champagne Corvette. But the last thing that he says when he pairs these lines together is, "The light of my life is going out tonight without a flicker of regret." And I think that is incredibly intentional.
Yeah.
Go back to Nights That Won't Happen, him saying the dead know what they're doing when they leave this world behind. It takes on this new meaning. Again, we talked about it in terms of natural death, unfortunate circumstances of people take their own life, but then David maybe self-purporting in that he knew, like he knows what he's going to leave behind.
Yeah.
It's just, it's, you go through this and you comb through it again with all the context. And that's why I wanted to talk about it in this kind of more linear fashion is I only knew it in that capacity. And then adding all of the things that I did research for this episode. I mean, this show exists for moments like this mm-hmm. and albums like this where it's just beyond like an album. Like, I don't know. We listen to a lot of like real lame pop punk that's just sad because
pop punk emo.
There's a big difference between sad Mom Jeans and sad Purple Mountains.
And like you mentioned it before too, A Crow Looked at Me by Mount Eerie. Like there's a huge difference for people who don't know what that album is. That's an album that a man wrote after his wife passed away, and it's one of the most like heart-wrenching albums you'll ever listen to. But yeah, like the sadness that we're talking about in this, like you said, compared to the pop punk like emo stuff that we do also like, it's just way different.
Yeah. I mean, obviously this is the topic we choose because we find something so like
beautiful.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just it's so compelling. It's such beautiful art, and it's so unfortunate that we're given it under these circumstances. I think this is like a perfect album. I think, unfortunately, with all good art, I think context really assists it in ascending to a different level. And unfortunately, the context of this does add both to the horrifying nature of the art itself, but it does add to it.
Absolutely.
I know you said that I've sent you this in the past, and I do remember it. But I guess generally, what are your thoughts on the album as a whole?
I forget to do things like song albums that people send me at times. I'll be like, I listened to it, and I'll forget that I remembered it. Like 3 weeks will go by after I quit listening to it, and then I'll be like, I'll forget about it. And this is an album that I don't think after like really diving into it again is something like I'll ever like forget existed a little bit. I think this album's phenomenal, honestly. Like you said, it's such a good album. It's very powerful. It's very poignant, especially knowing the context of everything and the outcome. I mean, unfortunately, I guess it wouldn't really technically be a posthumous release, but it's pretty damn close. Yeah. But unfortunately, things become more popular after an artist dies a lot of times, and I don't think that that's what really like holds merit for me in this. It's the writing in it, and the last time that I listened to it, I didn't look into the lyrics as much, and seeing like the writing is so fucking phenomenal. Like you said, the double meanings, the play on words, the kind of like
the technical aspects of writing.
Yeah. Even like there's so many just like little nods at like rhyming poetry. Like like you mentioned the pink Corvette. He also says, "I'm up above in a Band-Aid pink Chevrolet," or Chevette, I think. But yeah, his writing's phenomenal, and it's kind of inspiring also.
I don't think we'll have a David Berman in the future.
No.
I think he was such a uniquely specific talent for a multitude of reasons. He excelled in all facets of things that he decided to take on as creative outlets. He excelled, and I really don't know if we're going to get another talent. I mean, obviously there will be people who are inspired by him and do great, but it's not very often you get a person like him who can express themselves so vividly and introspectively and also make the music great. He's a very rare talent, and it's very unfortunate what happened. But yeah, now that everyone's nice and sad,
go listen to the album.
Yeah, go listen to the album. Don't take it from us. Just go listen to it and be sad.
Yeah, if you can stomach the topics, obviously.
Yeah,
but I imagine if you can't, you're probably not listening to us talk about it. Also.
Yeah. If you were gone in the first minute,
sorry,
probably not. Well, you're not going to hear this, but then also, it's probably an album you understood was not for you to begin with. So, all right. Well, it is Super Bowl Sunday, so we're going to go watch the game. Oh, this will be great. We can make predictions, and then it will either age horribly or it will be perfect.
Or we should have bet on the game.
On the game?
Yeah.
Okay, what do you want to bet?
No, I said we should have if we get it right, if we predicted it right.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not betting anything.
Yeah, go Birds.
Yeah, I'm on Team Birds.
Yeah. Pennsylvania ride or die, even if the Steelers can't make it.
Yeah.
We're rooting PA. I didn't send it to you. I went to the grocery store today, and there was a cookie cake, and it just said, "Whoever versus who cares, go Steelers."
That's awesome. Fucking Pittsburgh, dude. Yeah. Even when we're out, we're still just
we're still in it.
Everybody
baby.
Else sucks.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's been real. It's been fun.